Great stuff from Croke Park there. Moyna and Kelly speaking with both managers in the aftermath of a pretty controversial game, but another chapter in that rivalry writ large, so people will definitely be tuning into it next year. Now, Professor Niall Moyna is with us in studio and Cahair O'Kane is with us on the line. You're both very welcome to us this morning. It's a bit of a state of the nation on the state of Gaelic football. Cahair, I might start with you because it was your tweet that got the ball rolling yesterday. Schlockneil were playing Cahair in the Derry Football Championship, and we can roll the tape, and this is going to roll in the background while you describe what was happening. What did happen?
Not an awful lot for a long time. There was a spell of about it's hard because you didn't start timing it because you didn't expect it, but it was at least 3 minutes of the ball, basically Schlockneil keeping the ball on their own 45. Padraig Cassidy just soloed the ball. I would say somewhere between 40 and 50 times, almost standing on the spot, just dandering along the 45, back and forward. A couple of passes here and there, but that was all the excitement that was, and that was the way that about the last 3 or 4 minutes of the first half were played out. And Marfelt, the team out of possession there, were a point down and playing with the gale force breeze at their backs. You can hear the crowd starting to boo there.
Yeah.
It was, it really was a sight to behold. It was just, seen a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, where Marfelt just point blank refused to press out, and Schlockneil point blank refused to go in. And what you ended up with was that stalemate of everybody standing looking at each other for 4 minutes of a championship game.
I don't think I've ever seen anything quite as pronounced as this. And this is in the build-up to half-time. Was this basically the whole match?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't as drastic as that for the entire game. Obviously, that it was. It reached that point towards the end. You can hear the crowd starting to boo a bit there as well. It reached that point just at that spell towards the end of the first half, because Schlockneil were playing against a big wind. They were very happy to hold possession. They spent a lot of the first half holding possession, trying to slow the game down, which any team would do. But it was the fact that Marfelt, who were playing with a massive breeze and just refused point blank to come out of the shape that they had set up. And they had set up obviously to frustrate Schlockneil and to try, because just about everything over the last 5 years has been tried in Derry in order to beat them, and it hasn't worked. So Marfelt thought they'd try something else, but Schlockneil are quite happy to play that way, because they'll take it, and the knowledge that they probably have better forwards, and they'll get over the line. They don't care whether it's 3-2 or 10-5 or whatever it is.
10-5 was the final score, right? So Schlockneil do actually end up winning this game by double scores, which, I know some people on Twitter were like, it doesn't matter who wins, but actually it does matter that this tactic didn't work for Marfelt.
No, it didn't. No, I suppose that's where the criticism will come in then. I suppose they will feel that up to a point they justified it, because Schlockneil have been renowned in Derry as well for being a very attacking side down the years, and always entertaining to watch. But they haven't won a championship since 1978, and they have a crop of players that are capable of doing something more than they've done, and they would feel that they wanted to try something different. And
you
they
mean
would
Marfelt? Sorry, yeah.
Marfelt, yep. At 7-4 down, about midway through the second half, they were still well in the game, and they got a goal chance, and Conor McCluskey pulled it wide. And now, had that gone in, they get themselves level, they maybe go on and win the game. They would feel everything at that point then is absolutely justified. I suppose it all comes down to the result in the end, and Schlockneil did pull away in the last few minutes, and I suppose Marfelt's first score after 90 seconds of the game was their only score from play of the entire night. So you're definitely going to struggle to win when your emphasis is just entirely on the defensive end of it.
Yeah, Niall, I don't want to overreact to a single championship match in club football, and if it was just a single match in club football, you'd be a bit careful about what you were saying. But unfortunately, this appears to be a full-blown trend / fashion in Gaelic football at the minute.
Yeah, it's actually sad to see where Gaelic football currently is. It's an extremely poor spectacle. I've been to 2 games this summer. I mean, I would normally go 15, 20. Sometimes I go to 2 games a day. You couldn't pay me to go to watch a Gaelic football game now. It's absolutely appalling. And I think we have a responsibility to do something for our game. I gave a talk a few years ago at the AFL conference in Melbourne, and I spoke to some of the officials afterwards, and they had the same problem for a number of years. But they decided to address it, and they continually changed the rules. And when they changed the rules, the teams would catch up with that again, and they would continue changing the rules because they wanted to have it a spectacle. And their numbers now have increased dramatically. You just have to look at the attendance of the 2 All-Ireland semi-finals. You know, for the first time in history, there was more attending the hurling, and rightly so. It's, you know, it's a game for the ages. If I was growing up now, if I was a young kid growing up in Ireland today, I wouldn't be playing football. Hurling would be my game of choice.
What are the rule changes? A couple of things before we get into the specifics of the rule changes. For me, the biggest issue has always been the fact that rule changes need to navigate their way through a 2/3 majority in Congress, as opposed to creating a standing committee which is elected, and you can, however you want to make that committee, which is the Standing Rules Committee, and their job is to change the playing rules of the game. The rules of the organisation, change those all you want to Congress and make sure that there's 2/3. But like, if you want to change the rule on a kick out, the fact that that has to go to Congress, and generally it gets bundled in with 6 other rules, so they all rise or fall on the basis of votes of Congress. Wouldn't it be better just to come up with a group of people whose job it is year on year to make small iterations as you go?
Yeah, and I think the GEA are moving towards that. They realise that they have to change the current modus operandus. It's just what they're currently doing is simply not good enough. But the important thing is that whatever rule changes are made have to go all the way to under 12 and under 14 club level. And they're easy rules, you know, to enact and to apply. I think that's the important issue. I mean, they're all with all these wonderful ideas of how to change the rules, and people say they should only apply to inter-county. That's not the way it should be. It should be across the board. There have been lots of wonderful suggestions put forward. For me, it's obvious that the hand pass is a huge problem. And I think, it's easier to officiate 3 hand passes than it is 4 steps. In hurling and football, it's regular to see people take 5, 6, 7 steps. It's easy, 1, 2, 3. And I think that one simple rule could have a huge impact. I think the whole issue of scoring, I would have a new scoring zone, 35 metres out, an arc. Score outside that, you get 2 points. It means that players can't zone back in top of the D and play this defensive mode, because if you're getting 2 points, and would also promote shooting from outside, which would be brilliant, which is really out of our game. And I think the other thing is the whole issue about passing the ball back. Now, I don't know what the best way, can you pass it back across? It has to be a simple rule that you can't pass it back maybe across your own halfway line. It's those sort of simple rules. Now, obviously teams will catch up, and defensively they'll figure out how to get, but then we have to evolve. We have to come up with we have to, because we're going to lose out. Not just in Gaelic football, we're going to lose many of our young players to other sports if we don't radically make changes. Yeah,
Cahair, you've obviously, unfortunately, borne witness on a personal level to a lot of this football. Not to tar the entire province with the same brush. What do you think are the best rule changes that need? Because that's in your tweet. You're like, oh, rule changes absolutely needed. What do you want to see?
Well, Niall touched on it there about the idea of kind of the backcourt rule from basketball, where you cross halfway and you can't go back. It kind of simplifies it to a point where you cross a line and you can't go back over it. Other than, I would accept the opposition 45 from that rule, because I think it's a method of building attack. You can come back around there, but you're still in the attacking zone. Whereas what you're seeing now is what you saw last night. Teams are in their defensive zone, keeping the ball. I think if you make it the halfway line, I think you'd still get maybe what you had last night, because teams would deliberately not cross the halfway line so that they can still come backwards. So I think if you make it that when they cross a line, they can't go back over it, I think it's fairly simple. I think it's much easier to implement. Like, ideally, I suppose people have talked about keeping a certain number of players up the pitch. I don't know how that would actually work in practice. Impossible to referee. I think it's too restrictive as well. What you'd end up with is an overload of maybe 13 or 14 attacking players against 11 defenders, because the other 3 or 4 aren't allowed to come back and help. And I don't necessarily think that would make for a great spectacle. I suppose it would make for a high scoring game, but you could end up with some awful hammerings if you're overloading the attack by 3 or 4 men. So there are. I do believe that it's a fairly simple rule of not being able to go back across the line that you've crossed. Once the ball hits a certain point, it shortens the pitch. It makes it much easier, because the big problem is, Niall mentioned hand pass. The big problem is the tackle is so poorly defined, and it's so easy to keep possession that even the team on the ball, the team trying to come out and press them. If Maherfield had come out last night, it is so hard to get the ball back. That because the surface area is so big, people are so good now at taking the ball under pressure, and the tackle is so poorly defined that by the letter of the law, most contact is a foul, and referees are inconsistent in applying it. So you can get to a man, you can make contact on him, and all you're going to do is give away a free, and the cycle starts over again. So if you bring that rule in where they can't go back across a line, it shortens the area in which the team in possession can play, and it makes it more likely that you'll be able to get effective contact on the man on the ball. So I certainly think that's something that's worth trialling in the new year at least.
That's also putting the pressure on the team without the ball. That's like saying the rule change is being implemented to try and stop what teams like Maherfield were doing last night, rather than it's actually changing what Slot Neil were doing last night, because they can't cross back their line. Whereas should it not be the onus on the opposite team, the team that are sitting back, the team that are compiling themselves with this huge blanket defence? Like, it does seem that the wrong party is being punished here, if that makes sense. Like, how do you kind of counteract what's happening to the teams that are without the ball?
Look, it's a fair point, but I think you're talking about needing a spectacle, and this is part of the debate last night. Like, Slack Neil to me did absolutely the right thing. No team with any sense would have done anything else than keep the ball out of that zone where Maherfield had 15 players standing. Why would you go in there when you're defending that, or you're a point up against that one? But it has to be a spectacle, and we have to try and get more players engaged. And as I said, the surface area, with the fitness levels that exist and the strength of players carrying the ball, the surface area has become so big. And it's got, Dublin were the saviours of Gaelic football for a while, but they've largely been the team driving this, and we've seen this from them for the last 2 or 3 years now, where they will not, when they're in a certain position in the game, they'll just not take the ball into contact. As much Tyrone were blamed for last year's All-Ireland semi-final, and rightly so, they were the defensive team, and the onus was on them to come out. But that didn't make it. Dublin didn't do anything to make it any more of a spectacle either. And when neither team wants to be the team to make it a spectacle, then the rules have to change in order to allow it to become one. And to me, as I say, not that it has to favour the defensive team, but the change to me, it's the obvious change. I don't see what else you can logically do in order to to invite the kind of contact that you'll need in the game in order to see the ball stripped from one team and go back to the other.
Could you have a shot clock? Is that doable at under 12, under 14, under 16? You're shaking your head.
No, it's just not practical. I mean, think of a lot of rural clubs. It just wouldn't be practical, I don't think.
Because you need somebody to administer the shot clock and press the button.
Yeah, and sometimes just getting a referee, that in itself can be onerous at times. Look, there are no easy solutions. One of the things that I find when you go to games,
the technology probably exists. Just to interrupt, and sorry, but the technology probably exists that the referee could press the button. I mean, it would be expensive, but if we're talking about absolutely changing the whole, there's enough money floating around. You could definitely get a sponsor for this, where there is a shot clock and the referee presses the button, and the whole stadium, the whole venue, whatever, it's a small ground, it's a small field, everybody knows there's 30 seconds on that, and there needs to be a shot in the next 30 seconds. If the referee was the one to administer it, like with wireless technology, it would be pretty easy to have a button that goes beside the scoreboard.
Yeah, but it's a large pitch, and every person playing has to be able to see it, and there are lots of issues there. Like in basketball, it's nice, it's a small court, everyone can see it. One of the issues for me is that it's sort of the coaching that's going on when you see teams that are behind and know that they have to get scores, and they're still playing in that defensive formation. So it's an ingrained, and I think a lot of the coaches have to take responsibility for this. And when you see it all the way down to under 12 and under 14 level now, you really have to worry for the future of the game.
I did want to ask about that whole thing about coaching, is that most sports go through this evolutionary phase where defensive coaches come in and very quickly they become very prized. So if you look at the evolution of professional rugby, it was awful for about 15 years after professionalism, because they hired all these rugby league coaches who just came in and closed the game down, and they fully understood how to close space down. Is it possible we're just in that phase? Like what at the end of the rugby phase. Now, granted, they changed the rules. You have the All Blacks all singing, all dancing, and everybody is trying to pass off both hands and run lines at pace. Is there a possibility that the next evolution of Gaelic football is that we learn defensive structure, but also then how to start beating that defensive structure?
Yeah, up until a year ago, I would have agreed with you. I mean, I was in a programme here a few years ago, and I said every generation defines how the game is played, and I was totally opposed to changing the rules. I said the game would be much better for this, and you can see there is evolving, because even the way Dublin play, the way they probe, the game certainly has evolved. But we're at the stage where we're going to start losing our players, and that's the big issue. Can we wait another 4 or 5 years until we get to the next tranche and we've figured this out? I don't think we can. I think it's that urgent that it needs to be seriously addressed.
What happened in the last 12 months that changed your mind?
Just the utter garbage. Like watching that and going to see this on club grounds and county grounds. Even Dublin, one of their games this year in the Leinster Championship, the last 10 minutes and there were 6 or 8, 10 points up, and who pays, who wants to go to see that? And then you switch on the TV and you watch a hurling game and it's, oh my God, it's a thrill a minute.
Yeah.
So it's like watching paint dry, it's in slow motion, and I think because of that, and I do agree that every generation defines. My dad was catch and kick, and her generation it was hand passing, quick foot passing, and now it's a very defensive, and I think it was a natural evolution in the game because there was no defensive structure in Gaelic game. You put a corner back in, you just stayed in there, and and to be fair, and I've said this, that Jim McGuinness gets a lot of slack, but he should get credit as well because he found a way to improve the quality of his team and to make sure that he took the best of all the assets he had to win in All Ireland. But I think now that the fact that sort of play is inculcated down, and Gaelic football is because there's no offside rule, it's very, very difficult to overcome the defensive game that we currently have. And I just think it is killing the game year on, game by game.
Who can fix this? Whose job is it to fix this now?
I think the GAA realise that they do have a problem, and they have asked the counties to submit potential solutions to this, and I agree with your idea. They've got to set up a select group that does not have to go through Congress, that can make these changes on a yearly basis. Nearly every single game at club level, never mind county level, is now videoed. So there's lots of evidence. They can take all of this data, they can accumulate the data and say, look, here's the patterns that are now emerging. How do we overcome that and be proactive rather than reactive?
So that's the job for the president and that side of the house of Croke Park, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cahair, what do you want to happen?
In terms of the rule changes?
Yeah, the process that happens next. Because, after that video went viral last night, there's going to be a massive, long winter of everybody talking about rule changes. And for something tangible to happen, we just need to start trying stuff.
Well, this is it. I suppose, as you say, stuff has to go through Congress in order to get anywhere. Part of the problem with getting stuff through Congress is that, you'll find that counties can oppose rule changes because the clubs aren't necessarily that bothered what way their county executive votes, but the county management might be, and there can be pressure from that end, and all of a sudden you get a wave of support against a change in the rules because certain counties don't like it, it doesn't suit the way they're playing, whatever, and that can absolutely affect it, and I think that's wrong. The people taking the advantage from it shouldn't be the people that dictate what way the rules are. So you're absolutely right. You need a committee that comes up with ideas and implements it themselves. I would like to see the January competitions, the FBD, the McKenna Cup, have a wave of rules. Not necessarily a wave, just have a couple of rules trialed, see how they get on, if they're worth exploring in the long term.
Doesn't history teach us, though, that the intercounty managers get the veto because, you remember Mickey Hart in the sin bin? It was like, I'm absolutely not having this is no good. It existed in January and it was gone by March, April.
Well, I think the game is in a much poorer place than it was then. I mean, Gaelic football is dying unless it's radically addressed, and it can be a phenomenal game. You only have to look at the Dublin-Kerry game about 3 years ago, the semi-final. I mean, it was just an absolutely phenomenal. Even last year's final, when two teams go out and decide they're going to play, and I'm not saying traditional game, you know what I mean? You'd be stupid to go out and play man against man. But to put 15 guys behind the ball and to hold on to the ball 50, for 2, 3, 4 minutes and not let the opposition get it, that's not that's never what was Gaelic games was ever meant to be, or particularly Gaelic football was ever meant to be.
That's great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks very much for coming into studio, Niall. And thanks to you, Cahair, for talking to us this morning about this. You can tell that it's going to run and run and run.